And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Beth Beattie. Beth is a senior counsel at the Ministry of the Attorney General, Civil Law Division, Ministry of Health branch, and she has a broad-based health law litigation practice. Since January 2018, Beth has been a friend of the Bell Let's Talk campaign, and her story of living and working with bipolar disorder has been featured on television, radio, podcasts, and print media across the country. She's appeared on The Marilyn Dennis Show, CTV News, CTV North, CP24, and a CTV primetime special, In Their Own Words. She's written articles for the Globe and Mail and Lexpert magazine on the topic of mental health. And Beth will be co-chairing with the Treasurer of the Law Society, Teresa Donnelly, who spoke to us earlier, a Mental Health for Legal Professionals Summit on May 19th and 20th. So I think with no further ado, here's Beth.
Thanks very much, Nathan. I appreciate that kind introduction. And hi, everyone. It's nice to see all of you virtually, which I guess is just the way we do it these days, but hopefully not for too much longer. 19 years ago, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, and that's the most extreme form of the illness that used to be called manic depression. And the challenges I faced as a result of my illness have been profound. And the lessons that I've learned since going public about my mental illness have been wonderfully enlightening. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground with you today. I'm going to focus on a few main points. First off, my personal experience with mental illness, mental health in a legal workplace, mental wellness in the age of COVID-19, and how to get well and stay well. And I'll also touch upon the very interesting issue of concealing and revealing mental illness at work. So many of you will know that bipolar disorder, those of us who experience it, we have low depressed moods and then high manic moods, with hopefully long stretches of normal mood in between those ups and downs. Bipolarity is caused strictly by a chemical imbalance in the brain, plain and simple. I was 27 when I had my first bout of a serious depression. I was a first-year associate at one of the big Bay Street firms, and those places, like most law offices, can be real pressure cookers, especially for young people. And for me, depression felt like it was a sadness, but it was more like a numbness. And I couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't motivate myself, and I couldn't shake negative thinking. So I felt like this for a little while. And then finally, a friend of mine convinced me to go and see his psychiatrist. So I saw this doctor for 2 months, once a week, and he kept pushing me to take an antidepressant. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll take care of it on my own. But then the depression got bad enough that I thought, oh, geez, I'm going to try anything to get over this. So I started on an antidepressant, and I responded very quickly and returned to my old self shortly thereafter. And I'm lucky because I do respond to psychiatric medication quite well. So I felt great. For 2 years, everything was great. No problems with the down mood. Well, then I hit a bumpy point in my personal life as well as at work, and I stopped sleeping. Well, for me, if I combine an antidepressant with lack of sleep, I can zoom into a mania. So my first time I had a mild mania where I talked a mile a minute, people couldn't interrupt me. I wasn't sleeping yet. I felt totally energized and euphoric. I thought I was super productive, really insightful. And I was very irritable. And I love mania. For me, mania is so much fun, right? Who doesn't want to be euphoric? But for the people around me, they really didn't like it because I was just so wired. So over the course of the next 6 years, my psychiatrist sort of tinkered with my medication, and I had a few depressive episodes and a few mild manias. And then in 2002, over the Christmas holidays, something very significant happened. At its most extreme, mania can lead to psychoses where a person loses touch with reality. And that happened to me again in 2002 when I was 35 years old. I hit a difficult point in my personal life where my partner left me seemingly without any warning, the idiot, and I stopped sleeping. And my mood ramped up from a mild mania to a full-on, florally psychotic episode where I was convinced that my father was God and my nephew was the second coming, or the Jesus Christ of the 21st century. Now, I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, well, that's way out there. but I had objective evidence that what I was thinking was true. So for instance, my nephew's name is Jacob. Jacob, Jesus in modern parlance, that was close enough for me to think of it. And he was born on Christmas Day 3 years earlier. And his two uncles, my brothers, are named Mark and Paul, who played an important role in the Bible. And as I said, it happened over the Christmas holidays. So there was all sorts of symbolism around Jesus and God. So everything made complete sense to me. And I didn't know exactly what my role was in all of this, but I thought I was some sort of messenger. So to make a very long story short, my family finally convinced me to go down to CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is the main psychiatric hospital in Toronto. So I went with my brother, Paul. It was 2 a.m, and we went to the main emergency department area. We were seen briefly there, and then we were taken to a small room by ourselves. Well, Paul was really tired, and there's a Tim Hortons nearby, so he said he was going to go get a Tim's, and I was left to my own devices. Well, after a few minutes, I heard a bang come from the main emergency department area, and a woman's voice called out, "I need a lawyer." And she said it again, "I need a lawyer." So being the helpful person that I am, I got up and I went around the corner, and there was a woman sitting there with a trickle of blood coming down her forehead, and 2 police officers, one sitting on either side of her. And I announced, "I'm a lawyer. How may I help you?" Well, the officers stood up and they approached me. And then some staff members came from behind, and they escorted me to another room where I was to be seen by a psychiatrist. Well, by this point, everything was part of a grand plan. And the universe was telling me to approach the psychiatrist in a threatening manner. I wasn't meant to hurt her, but I was supposed to approach her as if I was going to. So I did. I walked towards her. Well, there was a button on the wall, and she banged it, and a code white rang out. And a code white means that there's a violent person. So all the staff from the surrounding vicinity converged on the small room, and they grabbed me by my arms and my legs, and they hauled me off to another room where there was a gurney, and they put me on the gurney, placed me in 4-point restraints, and shot me full of antipsychotic medication. And I lost consciousness like that. So that was the beginning of a 2-week stay at CAMH. I was put on a Form 1 and a Form 3 under the Mental Health Act, and I was given the formal diagnoses of bipolar 1 disorder. So when I was discharged from hospital after a couple of weeks, 2 themes played out for me. First off, I was obsessed with the thought that I was going to get sick again. I read lots of books and articles on bipolar disorder, and it's apparent that lots of people do get sick again. And I thought it was just going to be a matter of time before I became manic or depressed or both. And I'm no one special, so there's no reason why it wouldn't happen to me. And I felt like a ticking time bomb. And the second theme that played out was I was mortified at the thought that people would find out about my illness and my hospitalization. I'm a litigator, and we're supposed to be seen as strong and unflappable. And the stereotype that goes along with bipolar disorder is that we are inherently unstable and unreliable. And I certainly didn't want to be seen in those terms as a lawyer. So pretty much for 14 years, I did not share my story of lived experience, except for my closest friends and my family. So, okay, this is where it gets exciting, where I try to fool around with technology. So I'm hoping we've got a polling question lined up here. Oh, okay, bylaws, that's always a fun topic of discussion. All right, mental health and legal. Okay, here we go. So 20% of Canadians live with a mental illness at some point during any given calendar year. Now, what percentage of Canadians with a mental illness seek help for their illness? Is it 20%, 33%, 50%, or 75%? Okay, so no one in the crowd is being very optimistic and saying 50 and 75%. Um, More cynical is only 20% get help. The actual number is 33%. So 1/3 of people get the help that they need. And I find that an alarming statistic, because the flip side is that 2/3 of people are not getting the help that they need. So when you do the math, this is rough math, I'm assuming we have 36 million Canadians. Well, if 20% of them are living with some kind of mental health issue and only 1/3 are getting help, that means over 4.5 million people in Canada right now are living with some kind of mental health condition and not getting help for it. And please bear in mind, these are pre-COVID numbers. Okay. All right, now we're going to do the other fun part, which is I'm going to share my screen with you. I want to go to reading view, I think. Right, I thought that we had figured this out.
Do you see the green icon at the bottom of your screen? It says share.
Yeah. Can you see the slideshow? It's not perfectly placed right now, but can you at least see my screen?
No, you haven't shared your screen yet. You have to click on the green arrow button beneath at the bottom of your toolbar on Zoom, within the Zoom portal.
Yeah, I see that. Multiple.
And then click the blue button beside it now that will say share.
Oh, it's not funny. It's not saying that. Oh, it's saying 1% participant can share at a time. Multiple participants can share simultaneously, and then advanced sharing options. Let's try this. Any luck? Seeing anything?
We won't be, no.
Okay.
You
All
have
right.
Share screen.
Yeah, okay. I don't know why it's not. I'm going to give it one more try. And if not, we're not going to worry about it, because the slides, they just kind of have bullet points to keep you focused. I don't know why we're having so much trouble with this. We had trouble with it the other day. But then we figured it out.
Well, it was a bit of a different issue the other day, but.
You can also try pressing Alt-S. And then you just have to select which screen you want to share.
Oh,
did that do it?
Yeah, that's
Good job.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, and then reading. Okay, and I'm not going to worry about the stuff on the left-hand side, Katie, with the slides. If that's okay with you, I think we're good. Yeah, okay, all right, guys, sorry about that. Friends, and I'm not friends with technology at the best of times. Okay, so I went over the first couple here. So 1 in 5 Canadians are living with mental illness at any point during the year. 50% of Canadians are going to live with some kind of mental health crises by the time they're 40 years old. And over half of us see anxiety and depression to be epidemic in our society. Now, in terms of lawyers, we're in a especially difficult place, okay, where there was a study done by the American Bar Association that lawyers suffer at a significantly higher rate of mental illness. So for instance, 28% of us live with depression. Well, that's almost 4 times that of the general public. And the same goes for anxiety with 19% of us. That's almost 4 times that of the general population. Also, stress is an additional 23%. And in terms of problem drinkers, we're somewhere between 21 and 36%. So it's apparent that lots of us are living with some form of mental health issue, but not too many of us are actually talking about it. So I want to explore some of the reasons why we don't disclose mental illness. Now, during the rest of my presentation, I'm going to say you, as if each of you has some kind of mental health issue. And when I say that, it could be you, it could be a colleague, it could be a client, a family member, a friend. It's just easier if I just keep saying the one word you. So the most obvious one is fear of job loss. People who live with things like depression and anxiety, we tend to think that the worst is going to happen. We're catastrophizers. We think that you may have heard the term cognitive distortions, and those are ways the brains convince us of something that is not true. So it includes things like black and white, all or nothing thinking. So it's not that I thought I might lose my job if people found out about my illness. It was that I was convinced that I would lose my job. The reality is that the greater the job security you have, the easier, if it's ever easy, the easier it is to disclose the fact that you have a mental health issue. Junior employees, new employees, articling students, they're going to be less inclined to disclose. Also, yeah, we're concerned about being excluded from great work opportunities. And again, these cognitive distortions allow us to think that we're going to be relegated to doing dog files for the rest of our careers if people find out about our mental health issues. But I want to point out here that just because someone is living with some kind of mental illness does not necessarily mean that they're going to be unproductive. And my favorite story on this count is that of J.K. Rowling. When she was writing the first book of the Harry Potter series, she was living with a very serious depression and actually had thoughts of suicide. So here she was creating what some people would call a masterpiece while living in a very dark place. Perfectionism is rampant amongst lawyers. The American Bar Association said many lawyers, quote, have a strong sense of perfectionism and believe they must display this perfectionism at all times. I am a perfectionist, or rather a maladaptive perfectionist, and I'm full of imperfections. And this is a very debilitating combination. Many people have a hard time acknowledging our mistakes, let alone fessing up to the fact that we have some form of mental illness. Most of us don't want to let our guard down ever, and that keeps us quiet. Also, we have a strong preference for self-reliance. We just think that we're going to get over things on our own. That was certainly the case when I was first living with depression. The doctor, I was not taking his advice and taking medication because I thought, no, I'll get over it on my own. And I was wrong in that. Stigma. There's stigma in the office, outside the office. It's where we just we're concerned about getting adverse reactions from the people around us. And particularly, we're going to be concerned about adverse reactions from clients if they find out that we have some kind of issue. Yeah, feeling ashamed, that sort of self-imposed stigma is often present when someone has a mental health issue, so that keeps us quiet. We fear gossip. I mean, the reality is issues of mental illness are a juicy topic of conversation, so that can keep us quiet. It's easier to keep our heads down and just do our job. That was certainly the case for me for the 14 years. I just wanted to do my job and get out of the office at the end of the day and get on with the rest of my life without worrying about whether people knew that I had mental illness or even just suspected that I had mental illness. The next one, I find this one a very interesting one, sort of the concern about what people around us are thinking. So in the summer of 2016, I had dinner with my parents and one of my brothers, and I announced when I turn 50 in the spring, I'm going to come out of the mental illness closet. And my mother said, well, why would you do that? And my brother said, I thought you already were 50, which is a very typical big brotherly thing to say. And my father said, well, I thought you already had disclosed the fact that you have a mental illness. So we're not wonderful communicators in my family. And what I thought was most interesting was my mother's reaction, because I could just see the wheels turning in her head, thinking that one of the women in the bridge club going to think if they find out that I have a mental illness. And I suspect that there are also cultural sensitivities, that in some cultures it's even more difficult to disclose the fact that you have a mental illness. One thing that I say to young people is to try to escape parental and societal expectations when they don't match your own. And then finally, this was of huge significance to me. I realized how damaging it was for me to go those 14 years without having a role model in the form of a lawyer who was successfully practicing law with bipolar disorder, or if not bipolar disorder, then living with a serious depression or anxiety. I just did not know of any such lawyer or other senior professional. Other than one person, I did meet a teacher who has bipolar disorder, and we sat down and had a wonderful conversation about our medications, our hospitalizations, the issue of concealing and revealing mental illness at work. And it really was a wonderful conversation because it normalized our illnesses. But even with that conversation, I never sought out a lawyer who might have had mental health issues. Frankly, I don't know where I would have begun such a search. So what does all of this mean in terms of law offices? Well, if you look at the statistics and you look at the various reasons why people choose not to disclose mental illness, I'm going to suggest to you that law offices everywhere are full of lawyers as well as non-lawyers who have mental health issues and are not disclosing them. You may be aware of one or more of your colleagues, could be a client, a family member, a friend. You may well be aware of one or more of them having a mental illness, but I can almost guarantee you that you have other people in your life who are dealing with some kind of mental health issue, and they may really be struggling. It's interesting because in my case, I was floridly psychotic and in hospital for 2 weeks, but I only missed 4 days of work. Because the second week that I was in hospital, I would go to the office and then I would return to hospital in the evenings, take my medication. They wanted to make sure that I was getting enough sleep and that I was responding well. So it's amazing what you can get away with in terms of hiding mental illness. And similarly with depression, although I've had a number of depressive episodes over the years, I've only actually missed half a day of work. And I say that not because I think I deserve a medal, but because it just shows how productive you can be even when you're living with a serious mental health issue. And I will say the reason that I only missed half a day of work is because I am an extrovert, and it really helps me if I'm surrounded by people, if I get the energy from other people. Others who are not extroverts, sometimes they do need to take time off to get their feet back on the ground before they return to work. Okay, I'm going to try another poll. I'm going to skip the fourth one and go right to this one. Okay, so in any given week, how many people who are normally employed in Canada are unable to work due to mental health problems? Is it 50,000 people, 100,000, 250, or 500,000? Okay, looks like give 10 more seconds here. Okay, so the actual number is 500,000 people. 500,000 people are off work because of mental health issues this week. And this is a pre-COVID number, so who knows? It is thought by the Mental Health Commission of Canada that the economic loss in Canada from mental illness is over $50 billion a year. It's a huge, huge number. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about why we why we tend to conceal our mental illnesses. And I just want to briefly touch upon the fact that, in fact, there are good reasons for revealing mental illness. So for instance, you get the support that you need. Once I made the decision to go public, I was amazed at how much support I received. And 9 times out of 10, if I was talking to someone about my issues, they would tell me a story of their own, either their own challenges or those of a loved one. And also, you can learn about valuable healthcare services. So that could be a good therapist. It could be getting a good doctor. Now, some people think, oh, she's in such desperate need. She needs a psychiatrist. Well, the reality is most general practitioners are going to be a really good starting point to go to talk to about mental health issues and whether medication would be appropriate. The psychiatrists, they're really hands-on, medication oriented. For me, I did have to see a psychiatrist for a number of years because I have a bit of a complex drug regime. But even now, I just see my GP and she prescribes my drugs. So if you can find a good GP, that's very helpful. Just word of mouth can be very valuable, and you can only spread through word of mouth if you talk about having something going on in your life. Workplace accommodation, that could look like different things. Some people take leaves, some people work shorter hours, some people need to take time off in the middle of the day to see their doctor, to see a therapist, that sort of thing. So if you disclose for that reason, it can be helpful. And keep in mind, just because you disclose your mental illness doesn't mean you have to disclose everything. You can just reveal as much as you want to in order to get the outcome that you're looking for. You may enjoy a great sense of relief, because I got to tell you, hiding a mental illness can be exhausting. And I know, because I did it for 14 years. And then increasing your personal power. I found the coming out process to be really cathartic and invigorating and empowering. And the last thing is you can be living testimony against stigma. It's like with the civil rights movement, LGBTQ movement, Me Too movement, and so on, there is strength in numbers. And the more of us that come out, the greater is that other people are going to get the help that they need, and that we're going to be able to push forward in terms of getting more funding and that sort of thing. I wrote an article for Lexpert in, when was it? August of 2019, on why it is that we need leaders in the legal profession to disclose the fact that they have mental illness. Okay, so I want to talk about tips for getting well and staying well in the COVID era. So in my case, after I was hospitalized, I had 10 difficult months where I had a couple of major depressive episodes, but then my mood balanced out. I still live with an anxiety disorder, but the bipolar aspect of things has been quiet for many, many years. Like many people, I have found COVID, this period of time, to be very challenging. One of my brothers in Montreal had COVID-19 last March. He was one of the first and ended up in the ICU. And it was really touch and go for a while there. And I also have 2 88-year-old parents who live on their own. Well, they have 24/7 care, but they live on their own in their condo. And they both have dementia and many physical problems. And I'm the youngest of the 4 kids, and I seem to be the one managing most of it. And I have a busy law practice. So all of it's been quite overwhelming. I mean, trying to litigate remotely has its challenges, as I'm sure many of you know. So I've relied on 5 main tips for staying well. And it's interesting because they're scientifically based. So the first one I'll talk about is exercise. So recent studies have shown that cardiovascular exercise is just as effective or almost as effective as an antidepressant in terms of addressing issues of depression and anxiety. It's that cardiovascular exercise builds or boosts the endorphins, which are the brain's good feeling neurotransmitters. So if you work up a really good sweat, like I have a spin bike over there that I hop on a couple of times, like sort of basically once every 2 days, I try to do that. And it's a really good sweaty workout. And by the end, I feel like $1,000,000. And that sense sort of lasts for a couple of days. It's the same as the runner's high, and it can be very effective. Now, not everyone likes that good sweaty workout. A brisk walk can really be helpful. It can boost the endorphins a bit and also sort of give you some fatigue that will help calm the nerves and also help you to sleep better. And also music has a great way of boosting endorphins. So if you listen to music, if you play an instrument, if you sing, all of those things boost endorphins. And interestingly enough, eating hot peppers boosts endorphins. Medication. I take my medication religiously. I call it better living through chemistry. Now, people living with stress like this COVID era, lots of us are under stress. Most people don't need medication. It's just living with uncertainty. But for people like me who have wonky brain chemistry, we usually do need some assistance. And there's absolutely no weakness in taking psychiatric medication. It's no different than someone with diabetes taking insulin or someone with epilepsy taking an anticonvulsant. It's just correcting that body's chemistry. I see taking my meds as a way of keeping control of my life. And again, talking with a family physician is a good place to start. Therapy, talking to a therapist is great. It helps me deal with the daily stressors of life. I really like to be able to talk to someone about sort of identifying my triggers and how to respond to them. I'm currently able to do that through Zoom calls. It's very easy to do. It's been very interesting how easy the transition has been. The Law Society has a members assistance program that provides counseling services that can be done by video. Cognitive behavior therapy is very good. I found it very helpful. I've done it many times over the years, and I've done it so much that it just comes naturally, and I'm a big believer in it. It's logic-based and excellent for lawyers. Similarly, having a mindfulness-based practice can be very beneficial. Apps out there, Calm and Headspace. There are probably others, but those are two of the most popular ones. They have small monthly fees, but are well worth it. Sleep. If you have bipolar disorder, you have to make sure you get enough sleep, otherwise you can ramp up into mania. But that mania side, because I'm not really worried about getting manic these days, but I just find if I don't get enough sleep, then I can be left feeling vulnerable emotionally, and physically I can feel vulnerable as well. The National Sleep Foundation guidelines advise that healthy adults need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night. And bear in mind, though, that too much sleep may actually be a sign of that someone is depressed. And at the center of all of this is social support. And I can't emphasize enough how important social support is. I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive family and a great network of friends, and really relying on them has been the cornerstone of my mental well-being. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, thanks, Beth. Like, this is all old-fashioned common sense, heard it all before. Nothing I'm saying is revolutionary. And it's good for people with a formal mental health diagnosis, and it's good for people who are just living through a stressful time. However, the key to all of this is to establish a routine. So I said about my getting on my spin bike every couple of days. I play online poker with friends on Wednesdays and Saturday nights. Well, if I start to deviate from that regime, so I skip the spinning or skip a couple of the poker sessions, that's a sign to me and a sign to my friends that I might be going off the rails, that I might not be doing that well. So our routines offer an objective evidence of our state of mind. So that's why it's so good to have these in place. Okay. And then finally, I'd like to move on to staying mentally healthy in the era of massive screen time, which is what we're all subjected to right now, right? We're all on our screens, whether our work computers, our phones, our iPads, and so on. It's just massive how much time we're spending in front of our screens. And it's my experience, and I expect it's the experience of a number of you, that time seems to have lost all meaning. People are sending me work emails at all hours of the day, at night, on the weekends. They're my bosses and they're also my clients. It just seems that it's a free for all. I've noticed it's actually gotten better in the last month or so. I don't know if the higher ups are saying to calm down, but still I am getting emails at all sorts of times. And it's fabulous, the technology, because it allows us to work remotely, and I'm very grateful to have a job that allows me to do that. However, it can have a very negative effect on one's mental health. So we have to learn to switch off and digitally detox. It's just part of maintaining our mental health. So the first dot I have there is cutting down on blue light. I'm sure that you've all heard the fact that blue light stimulates the brain, and so we don't want too much of that. There are many common tips that you've probably heard already, but I'm going to repeat a couple of them. Taking breaks away from your computers and your phones throughout the day. Don't eat while being in front of your computer. Try to avoid working in your bedroom, and stop using electronic devices an hour or two before bedtime. Now, this next one, I just love. I just glued into this a couple of months ago about the delay delivery function. So on Outlook, and I'm sure other programs as well, you can use this delay delivery function. So what happens is, as an example, a client will email me at 9 o'clock at night. And I don't want to get in a to and fro, like I just don't want to get into things with them unless it's truly urgent. I'd prefer to leave it till the next day, but now it's on my mind and I probably know how I want to respond to them. I just don't want to respond that night. Or if I respond, I'll say, thanks very much for your email. I'll get back to you tomorrow. But what I'll do is I'll sit there and I'll actually type out the responsive email, and then I'll go to options, delay delivery, send 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then it's off my plate. I've checked it off. I don't have to think about it anymore. And I dealt with it in the morning. Because if I don't deal with it, then it's probably going to bother me. It's going to weigh on my mind. So this way I get it off my plate, out the door, and the client thinks I'm a rock star because I've sent it to them at 8 a.m. in the morning. And also something that I really like is the phrase by the end of. So my boss and my clients sometimes have an expectation that I'm going to respond very quickly to their emails. And if it legitimately is an email that needs to be responded to quickly, I will do that. If it's something that is not that much of a rush, then I will use language like, thanks very much for your email. I will respond by the end of the day. And if it's a routine matter, then I might say something like, thanks for your email. I will get back to you by the end of the week. And I just find that's a wonderful way of being clear in my communications, as well as setting boundaries. Sometimes there might be a bit of pushback and they'll say, no, I want to hear from you beforehand. But generally, I found that this is a really good way of setting expectations and boundaries. Yes, scheduling breaks into your calendar. I'm sure your calendars, like mine, are just chock full of meetings, and it's so important to just build in the breaks to actually do things like get outside. We have on Tuesday afternoons our weekly staff meeting, and it lasts an hour, and we have the option of doing it by teleconference as well as video conference. And I do it by telephone, and I get outside and I walk around for the full hour, and it just feels great to get that fresh air. There's that Japanese concept of forest bathing, and it comes down to getting outside, get fresh air, and get perspective. And then finally, avoiding Zoom fatigue. When you're on a video conference, try to avoid multitasking. It is so tempting to multitask, but it's interesting because there was a study done that found that switching between tasks can cost you as much as 40% of your productive time. So what you want to do is close other programs that are on your computer that are distracting you. Put your phone away, like make sure you don't have any other devices. Stay present, look away from your computer from now and then, and try to have some of your meetings by good old-fashioned telephone call. I made a presentation to Citibank earlier this week, and their CEO said, okay, we're gonna have Zoom-free Fridays, so they don't have any Zoom calls. They might have teleconferences, but they don't have Zoom calls. So I'm sort of at the point that I wanted to leave it open to questions. And you said that the treasurer was here earlier today. So I don't want to go over that. Yeah, Katie, what did she have to say? Can I give some more details or just rely on what she said?
She didn't, I mean, she covered mental health and she plugged your upcoming session, but that, you know, you're in new territory right now.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about it. It was organized, the programming, by the Voices for Mental Health, which is a group of us at the Ministry of the Attorney General, and we have lived mental health experience, or we care for a loved one who has lived mental health experience. And we do all sorts of programming. And for instance, we recently put a program on perfectionism, how to get better. Get it? We do it through people with lived experience. So it's very powerful because we get it from role models. Well, one of our members went down to Australia to do a LLM, and she went to a 2-day conference on mental health for legal professionals. And not one person spoke of lived experience for 2 days, not one person. And in fact, a judge spoke, and he said that he did not want to be identified as taking part in the conference because he didn't want anyone to think that he had any kind of mental health issue. So my poor colleague, Haley, who was already feeling isolated, felt even more isolated. So when she told us that, we said, well, why don't we put on the polar opposite conference? Why don't we put on a session where every speaker has lived mental health experience? So that's what we did. We put together a program, and it developed over time, and not absolutely everyone has lived mental health experience. About half of the 29 speakers do, but some are medical professionals, therapists, and so on, who sort of feed into it. But the narrative throughout are role models who have disclosed mental health issues. We have almost 4,000 people signed up already to attend. So it's we're hoping that it's going to be a real game changer. And we want to normalize the conversation around mental illness. And one of the things that we want to get across is this is not just about those of us with bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, addiction. It's about all of us. It's for anyone who's going through a difficult time. Because even if life is going along tickety-boo for your first 10 years, let's say, of practice, you hit a point where you're dealing with an elderly parent, relationship breakdown, COVID-19, like pandemic parenting, like we all have our struggles. So we're not just improving the profession for those of us with a formal mental health diagnosis, we're trying to improve the profession for everyone who goes through difficult times at different stages of life. So we're hoping to knock it out of the park and for it to be a game changer.
We've been told to register for it, so I think a lot of people are looking forward to it. I do have a few questions that have come in. One thing I do want to say, though, quickly, is that I'm familiar with a friend of mine put it to me this way at one point, that we're all on the mental health spectrum at any given point.
Yeah.
You can be sort of a mentally well and a mentally unwell. But people taking medication who have a mental illness could be on the mentally well side, and someone with no mental illness could be on the mentally unwell side without proper diet, proper sleep, or proper, you know, maybe they went out and drank too much, something.
Yeah, so, totally. Like I have I have bipolar 1 disorder, but I haven't been sick in 18 years.
Yeah.
like I've been hospitalized and floridly psychotic and I haven't been sick.
Yeah.
So to your point, you can have good mental health and have a mental illness, or you can have a mental illness, no mental illness, and have bad mental health. So yeah, it really is a spectrum.
Right. So what are the signs that people can look for in a colleague or a client that they may not be doing well?
Yeah. So in the age of video conferencing, and I assume that a lot of you are meeting with clients through video conference as well. So I'll really speak from that perspective, although it also applies if they're in your office, whether a colleague or a client. During a video conference, if someone consistently doesn't turn their video on, so you have multiple meetings and they just don't turn their camera on, that could be a sign. Or if they have their camera on, but they're showing real fatigue, like excessive yawning, their hair is a mess, like it appears that they haven't been showering, those can be signs. They're late for meetings, they're hard to get hold of. They seem to be lacking motivation. They're not getting things done in time. And that's more than a lack of motivation. Like people who have anxiety and depression tend to have cognitive problems, so memory loss and an inability to concentrate. So that might lead them to missing deadlines. So that's some of the things. Now, please bear in mind that people can have wonderful poker faces, right? That they could be really struggling, and yet you can't tell on the outside. I mean, how many times have we seen people in the media, Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, right? Like they look like they had it all and they ended up taking their own lives. So people really can have poker faces. And what I say to managers is if someone discloses to the manager that they're living with some kind of mental health crisis, to take it very seriously, because most people choose not to disclose if they think that they can get away with it. So if they're coming to you, they're really maybe past the breaking point. Well, Katie, you're on mute. The phrase of the
yeah. So how do you approach a colleague? What if you think something might be wrong or off, or they need help? How do you even start that conversation?
Yeah, I think that checking in is the most important thing. So let's say you're on a meeting with someone, video conference, and they've got their arm in a sling. And you're probably going to ask them, hey, what happened to your arm? And the same thing goes for if someone appears to not be doing well emotionally, which is to ask them how they are doing. Historically, we haven't wanted to pry, right? Like when I was growing up, it was all the talk, oh, don't pry into their personal business. But with all of the advocacy that I've been doing the last few years, I realize how much we have to break the silence surrounding mental illness. People really want and need to talk about mental health issues. Again, I go back to when I'm talking to someone one-on-one, 9 times out of 10, they're telling me a story of their own. And sometimes it's like, it's a desperation or sort of like this eruption, like they just can't, it's cathartic for them to get it off their chest and to be able to talk about it. So we really, there is that need and desire to talk about stories. So if you check in with them and say, hey, you don't seem yourself lately, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? That can go a long way. Now, look, this is a sensitive subject, but I think it's worth touching on. Speaking of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, it's suicide. That if you think that someone is at risk of taking their own life, ask them point blank if they are having thoughts of suicide. That runs counter to what some people think is the idea, like, oh no, I can't do that because that's only going to make things worse. The majority of health professionals say that it is appropriate to ask them point blank if they're thinking about taking their own lives, because it gives them the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to feel that they're being cared for, and the opportunity to get some help. Because if you're the listener, you may be in a position to say, well, okay, why don't we come up with a plan to get you some help? Yeah, and just generally speaking, like, I just can't emphasize enough what an important role you can play in helping a colleague and helping a client who is going through a difficult time. My advice when someone is coming to you and saying that they're going through a difficult time is to actually not give them advice, but rather than listen to them and ask them if there's anything that you can do to help. It can be life-changing for the person, and that is not an overstatement.
Thank you. I think that is it for questions. If anyone has any other questions from the audience that hasn't typed them in yet, you can jump in, and we've got a few more minutes. There's one long one that's just come in, but I'm having trouble deciphering it. I'll just read it. The struggle for many clients with a mental health diagnosis, especially where the parent with Tourette's, OCD, or bipolar are treated with a caution which is not warranted and have to disprove the presumption that they are as normal as any other parent. I just am having trouble reading into this. It ends with the comment that mental health isn't getting the respect that racism does, which I don't necessarily think is true. But I'd love to hear, I don't know, do you feel that mental health has sort of come out of the closet and people are talking about it more and more, especially since Bell Let's Talk Day 10 years ago?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think mental health has come very far, and it has a long, long way to go, is the bottom line. And it's frustrating, right? Because 20% of us at any given time are living with a mental health issue. So why aren't we talking about it more? There's still just so much stigma around it. I read a really interesting book by Bill Bryson called The Body. And he talked about a study that was done back in the 1960s in the UK, and it was done of doctors. And 9 out of 10 doctors would not tell their patients that the patient had cancer because there was so much shame affiliated with having cancer. Well, now we're running for the cure and relaying for life, and the men are wearing, the Movember look. And I'm hopeful that it's just a matter of time before we get to that point when it comes to mental health. So the door has been open. I think more of us in the legal profession are talking about it, more in other professions are talking about it. I think that the more that we see some cross-pollination between professions and employers, the better things are going to get. So I think we're on our way, but we certainly have a long way to go.
That's it for questions. That's good. I think Nathan's going to pipe in, but maybe it's Bill. I've lost track.
I think it's my turn. So thank you very much, Beth, for sharing your story with us. I think it's a very important story, and we very much appreciate you telling us all about it. And I think the tips and references that you've made will be very helpful, for us in our own struggles or trying to assist colleagues. So thank you very much for your time.